1.
For seconds. That's all it took to crack a legend that Washington spent decades polishing. For years, the B-2 Spirit was marketed as the aircraft that nobody could see, nobody could follow, and certainly nobody could anticipate. The invisible bomber. The untouchable spear of American power. And yet, in the middle of a real conflict involving Iran, that story suddenly looks a lot less solid than it once did. Because according to information now circulating through defense circles, a Chinese data analysis system may have detected the deployment that preceded the U.S. strike against Iranian targets. Not by tracking the bomber itself, not through some miraculous radar breakthrough, but by reading the traces left around it. And if that claim holds even partially true, it raises a far more uncomfortable possibility than simply the stealth bomber was spotted. It suggests the battlefield itself has changed. For decades, the B-2 Spirit occupied a near-mythical position inside the U.S. arsenal. Even the United States Air Force has described it as a platform capable of penetrating air defenses once considered impenetrable. Intercontinental range. Operating ceilings above 50,000 feet. A fleet so small that every aircraft carries the aura of something almost ceremonial. The image was carefully cultivated, a flying wing appearing out of nowhere, striking deep inside hostile territory, and disappearing before anyone understood what had happened. That wasn't just a technological claim. It was a political narrative. The idea that the United States could reach anywhere on the planet, deliver overwhelming force, and remain essentially invisible in the process. That narrative came back to the forefront during a recent military campaign known as Operation Epic Fury. On February 28, 2026, the U.S. Central Command, United States Central Command, confirmed that the campaign began following a presidential order and targeted Iranian military installations. Officials described it as the largest regional concentration of American firepower in a generation. Within that operation, several B-2 bombers reportedly took part in nighttime strikes using precision-guided munitions against hardened Iranian facilities. Even in open aviation traffic, identifiers appeared. For aircraft were tracked under call signs Petro 41, Petro 42, Petro 43, and Petro 44. Which is already interesting, because a weapon supposedly designed to leave no trace was suddenly leaving breadcrumbs in publicly accessible data. But the real fracture in the story didn't emerge from traditional radar detection. It appeared somewhere else entirely, inside the vast ocean of information that accompanies every modern military deployment. That's where China enters the picture, not as a passive observer, more like an analyst studying the turbulence created when a massive military machine starts moving. A Chinese technology company known as Zhengan Technology reportedly operates an intelligence platform called Jinqi. According to reporting referenced by the South China Morning Post, the system provides intelligence services to the People's Liberation Army. And that platform claims it detected signals pointing to the U.S. deployment before the offensive became public. The method is the revealing part. Jinqi apparently didn't need access to the bomber systems. It didn't need secret codes or insider leaks. Instead, it combined satellite imagery, open aviation data, shipping movements, and scattered radio emissions to reconstruct the operational picture weeks in advance. In other words, it didn't see the aircraft. It mapped the ecosystem supporting it. That distinction matters a lot, because in modern warfare, the stealth aircraft is no longer an isolated object slipping through the sky. It's the visible tip of an enormous logistical pyramid. Think about what a B-2 mission actually requires. Tanker aircraft for mid-air refueling, mission planning units, satellite coordination, air corridors cleared across continents, electronic surveillance support, intelligence feeds from multiple domains. One aircraft, thousands of moving parts, and each part produces signals. Radio discipline, aircraft movements, naval activity, satellite positioning, logistical preparations. None of those elements individually reveal the mission, but when algorithms assemble them together, patterns start to emerge. That may be the real story unfolding here. China didn't need to break stealth technology. It simply learned how to read the noise surrounding it. At this point, I find myself wondering something that rarely appears in official briefings. How many other supposedly invisible operations are already being reconstructed in real time by analysts watching open data streams? Because once that door opens, secrecy becomes much harder to maintain. Give us your opinion in the comment box below. If the Chinese claim is accurate, or even partially accurate, the implications for Washington are serious. The vulnerability wouldn't lie in the bomber's shape or its radar-absorbing coatings. The weak point would be everything around it. Logistics, support structures, operational patterns. Algorithms can feed on all of it. Some analysts have already hinted at this broader problem. In modern conflicts, stealth platforms are no longer islands operating in silence. They are nodes inside vast information networks. Networks that can be observed from space, monitored through public data, and increasingly interpreted by artificial intelligence. The Pentagon itself seems aware of this shift. In fact, American planners have already experimented with deception tactics aimed precisely at confusing this kind of distributed observation. During a previous operation in 2025 known as Midnight Hammer, U.S. planners reportedly sent decoy flight activity toward the Pacific Ocean while the real B-2 strike force traveled across the Atlantic toward Iranian targets. That maneuver suggests something important. Washington knows people are watching. And not just intelligence agencies. Independent analysts, commercial satellites, data scientists, software platforms, an entire global ecosystem now examines military movement in near real time. The battlefield has expanded into the information sphere. Meanwhile, in Beijing, that environment is being studied carefully. Chinese strategists have shown growing interest in fusing massive data streams, satellite imagery, shipping registries, aviation databases, electronic signals, into unified analytical systems capable of detecting patterns before human analysts even know what they're looking for. Which brings us back to the irony here. The United States has been investing heavily in exactly the same concept. The U.S. Department of Defense has described decision support systems designed to ingest sensor data, apply machine learning algorithms, and accelerate everything from targeting decisions to post-strike damage assessments. One platform often mentioned in that context is developed by Palantir Technologies, whose software integrates geospatial intelligence with operational data for military planning. Washington essentially helped pioneer algorithm-driven warfare. And now other powers are playing the same game. In February 2026, the AI company Anthropic acknowledged that its Claude system was already being tested within U.S. national security agencies for intelligence analysis and operational modeling. That alone tells you something about how modern war is evolving. Decisions are increasingly shaped by software, data fusion, predictive modeling, which makes the Chinese claim particularly striking, because it implies that the same logic can be applied in reverse, using open information to anticipate the movements of even the most sophisticated military platforms. If that's happening, the consequences extend far beyond one mission. They touch the strategic balance. Iran, for example, could gain something extremely valuable from this situation. Not necessarily the ability to stop a B-2 strike outright. That remains extraordinarily difficult. But even partial awareness of an incoming operation changes the timeline of war. Time to disperse sensitive equipment. Time to reinforce defensive positions. Time to move assets that might otherwise be destroyed. And in warfare, time is often the difference between catastrophic loss and manageable damage. There's another dimension as well. China and Iran have been expanding their military and technological cooperation in recent years. Reporting from Reuters has described Chinese engineering support and equipment transfers to Tehran, while Iran has reportedly explored the acquisition of advanced anti-ship missiles such as the CM-302. None of that automatically means China is feeding operational intelligence to Iran. But it does illustrate a broader alignment of interests. Meanwhile, the world of surveillance continues to thicken. Commercial satellites multiply. Data flows expand. Artificial intelligence models grow more capable every year, which means the sky is no longer silent. Before we reach the end of this story, let me ask something slightly uncomfortable. If stealth aircraft are increasingly exposed by the data ecosystems around them, does the future of air power depend less on hiding machines and more on controlling information? If you're still watching, you already care about understanding this conflict beyond the headlines. Because the deeper lesson here isn't that the B-2 has suddenly become obsolete. Far from it. The aircraft remains one of the most capable long-range strike platforms ever built. But the environment around it has changed dramatically. The myth that surrounded the bomber, this idea of absolute invisibility, was always a bit of a simplification. What made the B-2 powerful wasn't that nobody could ever detect it. It was that detection came too late to matter. Now the timeline might be shifting. If data analysis can anticipate deployments before aircraft even reach their targets, then stealth becomes part of a much larger contest. Who can interpret the battlefield first? And that's where the strategic balance becomes uncertain. Because the next confrontation between major powers may not be decided by the most advanced aircraft alone. It may hinge on something less visible but just as decisive: who understands the flood of global data faster, and who turns that understanding into action before the other side realizes what's happening. The bomber that once symbolized invisible power is still flying. The difference now is that it's flying inside a sky crowded with sensors, satellites, and algorithms. And somewhere, long before the engines appear on radar, someone may already be reading the footprints it leaves behind. Subscribe if you haven't already, because we're tracking the evolution of this story day by day. Make sure to activate notifications and don't miss our next report. And remember, you can now become a channel member. If you believe in this project and want to see it grow, your support makes all the difference. If you'd like to support our channel financially, which we greatly appreciate, you can do so through Patreon and PayPal. The link is in the video description.